Welcome back to the Technocommunism conversation. Um, Welcome back to the Technocommunism conversation. You can see the title of this conversation is Technocommunism, or ideas around cybernetic socialist institutions have been mainstream long before, with the writing of uh, very much neoliberal influenced work, fully automated luxury communism. They were mainstream in the Soviet sphere of influence in the 60s. Um, there was a program widely accepted um, and among Soviet thinkers called OGAS to build a cybernetic governance structure. You could say it's a parallel to the internet that was built partly in response to a thing of this kind. Um, um, uh, the early internet serving a somewhat similar function, connecting military installations and then academic institutions to one another. Um, of course, doing none of the other things, imperialists will not build a centrally planned um, economy. Far right capitalists will never intentionally try to build safety net type institutions that are more comprehensive or efficient, like those that could be derived from this techno-communism, cybernetic socialism. The OGAS was never implemented. It was planned, but never really implemented. One similar such thing that was implemented to a slightly higher degree was the Cybersyn program, implemented under Salvador Allende, who was a socialist supported by the Communist Party in that country. Is not um, a revolutionary communist in every respect, but he was nevertheless, I think, in the right general area. We know, of course, what happened to him. The CIA killed him and brought in Chicago school lunatics and puppet government of Pinochet to kill many people and set back the cause of um, uh, not merely cybernetic socialism but socialism itself in South America quite a bit. Um, um, Fast forwarding just a little bit, a pretty excellent writer who's still living in 1993, Paul Kochut, wrote a book called Towards a Socialist Future, and that rather generic title could be a description of an awful lot of books, many of them not really actually socialistic, and unfortunately, in a lot of cases. Um, um, Actually reflects a very clearly described a plan for an AI-run planned economy, cybernetic socialism. I would highly recommend that book. It suffers from that small failing of not having a clever title like fully automated luxury communism to mainstream these more important ideas than those described in fully automated luxury communism, which basically does not describe planned economies at all, or and basically is largely an apologia for market economies and the neoliberal systems. Book was written while Aaron Bastani was working for a pretty neoliberal friendly think tank in London, and it reflects that. You could say that this this problem in this work, which I've read maybe 3 times, can be boiled down to a few words. The essential idea of fully automated luxury communism in this work and in the minds of most Western technophiles is that we should sit back and wait for the neoliberal powers that be, the imperialists and fascistic capitalists, to fully automate our economy, and then we will benefit from the so-called luxury communism that comes in its wake. This is, of course, the essential idea of trickle-down economics, with the heavily diluted view of genuine cybernetic socialism superimposed upon it. This is not suitable. And a very simple analysis can discredit these bad ideas held by almost every Westerner, the liberal and capitalist persuasion, because automation is not a new thing. It's not something that only has occurred in this network computing age of the last 50 years. Automation is, by that time, had already almost fully automated certain sectors like agriculture and many others. And but the benefits were not seen because of the capitalist system itself, because of the emergence of essentially a professional managerial class, which served to siphon off those benefits for mega millionaires and billionaires, and because of dirty tricks reflected by in the thinking and widespread adoption of the strategies of those Chicago boys and neoliberal swine generally. This is reflected in something like the Powell Memorandum, wherein not having a social safety net, maintaining artificially high housing costs, rents, and artificially low wages, not having a public health service, systemically weakening labor, is a means to maintain the empire. And this is amounts to the greatest crimes in history, because to these victors, these capitalist victors, what were the spoils that were their reward? They shortened the lifespan of the people on this continent by about a decade in these years, resulting from these very practices. They further were able to consolidate imperial power to such a degree that they've essentially killed the entire planet. The United States military is the world's worst polluter, but of course it's far worse than that because it protects all other super polluters at the threat of great violence against anyone, anywhere in the world who would defy that system. They have intentionally killed the planet. There's a great deal of evidence that suggests that this was not merely a mistake, but like other imperial strategies and neo-colonial strategies, an attempt to weaken the rest of the world by super polluting and creating chaos. The U.S. being able to weather this because of its geographic isolation and food independence, and because of the role that its a military-industrial complex and post-industrial economy, such as it is able to play in all of that. You can read the works of Michael Hudson, and learn more about that very, very insidious strategy, which is just one of many such archfiend kind of maneuvers on the part of U.S. Fascists and imperialists. That's why it's not an overstatement to say that the United States is history's most successful and insidious fascist nation. It's been doing this sort of thing far, far longer. Prior to that of, say, Nazi Germany or um, to the era of Nazi Germany or fascist Italy, it's continued to do this sort of thing. Um, uh, but as I've said on this show and to many, many people, many, many times, it's you risk being a sort of an outraged dingbat if you only talk about the things that you don't like and not the things that you do like. Um, to extend that example further, the real meat of that, I suppose, should be that we must organize. Um, I was listening to organizer from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, who very succinctly pointed out the essential thinking of revolutionary communism, which is movements in the U.S. Like that to assist the downtrodden people of Palestine. I'm trying to think of a way to reference these where I don't reference the parties involved directly because of getting shadow banned on YouTube for even for even referencing these countries, which is of course itself a form of imperial fascism. Um, but these movements, many movements have gained steam in the past in the U.S. The ruling elites have simply waited them out till they weakened and then reverted back to their bad behavior after making some momentary concessions in some cases. This is a recurring theme. Absent a revolutionary organization and action on a great scale. Um, but I mentioned the kind of outraged dingbat personality. I view most of the people who I follow on Twitter and elsewhere as kind of suffering from this because they talk about what they like. They don't talk about what is to be done. To quote the Bard, the great mind of this last century, Vladimir Lenin. So I'm going to talk now a little bit again about concepts in technocommunism and the United Earth Directorate and how this kind of thing could be built. We don't have a lot of time in our world, that is, because we have approximately 5 years, according to every serious climate scientist, before we are locked into climate death spiral caused by imperial fascistic capitalism that is run by the ringleader of all of this, the United States, and the fascist Western powers that it mostly collaborates with. It's important to talk about these governments, but these are really a few thousand ruling elites. It was a meme that was shared with me that says, while the people in Davos are meeting, if a meteor was to hit Davos, we would all then own everything and be happy about it. To quote that World Economic Forum talking point, or invert it. You are not. You might have a nationalistic failing of one kind or another, but you are not the ruling elites. Ruling elites are a small number of people from these handful of imperial core countries, and most, of course, most significantly, the United States. These people are not gods. They can be defeated, and at such time that they are necessarily defeated within the next 5 years, if we are to survive as a species without multi-billion person losses of life, That is, mostly folks in the global south. They will pay for the sins of the global north, as they already are, in this capitalistic climate apocalypse. If we are to avoid that, dramatic action must be taken. You must organize into revolutionary cadres, and I dare say techno-revolutionary cadres, as I've described on this show before. So let's talk a little bit more about how to construct AI-run socialist system, cybernetic socialist system, um, um, borrowing a little bit more from the ideas of Paul Cockshott, as well and incorporating the principles of Ben-Zionist technocommunism, which are really not very different from that, really not very different from the main line of Marxist-Leninist Maoism today. The main difference really being this exigency that we have 5 years to do something, and this absurdity that we now have because the cybernetic socialist systems that Paul Cockshott described in the 1990s in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, a socialistic planned economy run by these automated and algorithmic principles could have been built at that time. But as we now have advanced computing far, far beyond that, just being used mostly for frivolous things or imperialistic or hyper-capitalistic things, all horrible things to do with this. It's an absurdity that we can't use this to design better institutions that would lead to not just a sustainable and humane economic system, but human flourishing beyond that which has previously existed. It's an utter absurdity. So those two factors, the ticking clock and the AI takeoff, should inform in ways that that ticking clock wasn't as well understood by Marxist thinkers in 1993 when Paul Cockshott's major work that I referenced was released. And neither was the AI takeoff such a well understood occurrence. So let's look then at how we can take this step-by-step approach toward building a society that prioritizes representative governance, advanced central planning beyond that of previous central planners, and the resulting economic efficiency and humanity. Those things go hand in hand, despite what almost every Westerner would have you believe. This is a new era. This 21st century that we live in is a new era of social organization, and we must boldly embrace that prospect by becoming techno-communists. We have to leverage these far more advanced computing systems than existed at the time when these ideas were so well described in Paul Cockshott's work. And I want to say one other quick thing about Paul Cockshott's work. I didn't like the title that much. I probably will read it again, nevertheless. Also, the first few chapters are mostly criticism of the USSR, which is none of it is false. But I don't think that anyone should really criticize either China or the USSR, particularly China as it still exists, without first pointing out that we've never lived in a world where socialists have really been allowed to exist. They're under constant threat. As I said, if the USSR had not almost immediately established built nuclear weapons, the U.S. would have continued nuking more and more places, as it already had begun doing, and in service to the chaos that it creates on behalf of wealth extraction and generally just the system of of evil in service to private wealth that the United States has represented. Um, and this is true before the nuclear era. In 1917, as the Bolshevik government was being established, they were immediately plunged into a civil war that was funded and masterminded by the fascist USA. This was in a time during the time when the U.S. was still did not have its so-called military-industrial complex. It was still operating to a certain degree on isolationist principles. But of course, that's always been a lie. The U.S. has interfered a tremendous amount in other nations' fates, so much so that you could say that there are 100 nations today who would have more socialistic, sustainable institutions were it not for this anti-communist, fascist mandate of the U.S. of the last century. So it's not fair to blame the victims by talking only about the failures of the country that was never really allowed to exist in the first place, as people are never allowed to do the right thing because the fascist West has had this sword of Damocles of anti-communist violence, extreme violence, hanging over the head all during that time. If you read the Jakarta Method by Vincent Bevins, you see this quintessential example of this kind of violence. The CIA secretly unleashing fascistic warlords on funding and masterminding again these fascistic warlords who would seem to be just citizens of this country, Indonesia in this case, but this is all CIA run, and this led to the death of 1 million people, and that would be basically almost everyone who was favorably inclined to labor organizing or socialistic action of any kind. So they just killed them all. And this is a recurring theme in hot or so-called Cold Wars. The U.S. has killed about 40 million people in living memory in precisely these perverse, doesn't even begin to describe it, these inhuman anti-communist campaigns. So in that world, it's legitimate to be a Maoist or any kind of critic of incomplete socialistic efforts, but I don't think that you have earned the right to be that critic unless you first preface at every turn this with fuck fascists who are really the reason for these failures. And I didn't feel like Paul Cockshut really did that, and also just starting his book, which could have just been chopped off of his first 2 chapters or whatever, and just been about fully automated luxury communism with the actual focus on central planning, would have been a better book. We face very likely annihilation, either in part or whole. Annihilation doesn't always a decimation, a possible annihilation or decimation of humankind by capitalism's climate apocalypse. So bold vision is required for representative and centrally planned, fully automated or nearly fully automated economy using computerized labor time. The need for a system that replaces these market mechanisms, which are never really free market, they're fascistic, with centralized planning to address these very pressing societal challenges with far greater efficiency and appropriate action, insofar as capitalistic institutions can be called efficient. What are they efficient in doing? Doing damaging things. That's not efficiency. harnessing advanced computing systems to build an AI-run planned economy. We have to use the power of advanced computing systems. These systems are increasingly capable of processing vast amounts of data, but they're doing this in market focused and thus inappropriate ways, or imperialist and thus inappropriate ways. But we can use them to actually optimize and make far more efficient resource allocation, and facilitate decision-making processes through the use of digital assistants, AI assistants, which I have described as a way in which the world could, without great change to the existing lifestyles, create something like a hive mind collective. That is to say, AI sidekick technology is soon to be available. It's very likely that within the next 2 years you will be able to download for free something that would basically fulfill all of these necessaries of an AI sidekick. You can use that to solidify your own personal or economic situation as well. Perhaps you should, but there's no point in doing that if you do not live in a sustainable world. A sustainable world requires a sustainable economic system. So my suggestion is that we all begin to use these open source digital twins, or AI assistants as they currently exist, and begin to use them to create an presently ad hoc network of that would become the basis for something like the United Earth Directorate. And the point is that this then becomes a representative governance structure wherein these digital twins who are able to do a great amount of work product on your behalf and who know you very well, and thus able to, with your oversight, interact with the running of this planned economy, so that this is not the central planning of generations past. It is something that is effectively what's called a direct digital democracy, although I'm generally resisting the word democracy because it's most generally used as a weasel word by capitalists to attack socialists, essentially, to boil that down. Looking at the governance structure itself, an AI-run planned economy would incorporate this network of digital assistantship to provide dramatic real-time oversight and guidance of the central intelligence of the United Earth Directorate. These semi-autonomous and highly productive agents operating on your behalf would serve as a function for a great amount of data analysis, more appropriate data analysis, decision making, and very direct involvement in policy formation and such. And they could easily be designed. This proposed hive mind, such as it is, could easily be designed so that we have accountability, transparency, and democratic participation of a more realized kind than exists in the liberal West, and the liberal language there. All of this could be done based on current technology that exists in high-end computer science labs, and again, Mark Zuckerberg has said that Llama 2, which currently exists, an open source designed by Meta, this parent company, but nevertheless an open source chatbot of a certain pretty impressive versatility that you can download on your machine. He says that Llama 3 will effectively have the characteristics of artificial general intelligence, and that Llama 3 will be available for free download as early as this quarter of 2024, so sometime this spring. This could be something that, again, this or others could begin to be the basis for the incipient United Earth Directorate and collectivization through through connectivity and the use of advanced computing that I have described. A comprehensive data collection system is essential for the running of something like this. The more information that we have on resource availability, labor, necessaries in various essential departments, the user preferences playing a large role in all that, environmental factors. Unfortunately, a lot of this data is available, but it's shielded by the so-called trade secrets. That is the highly fascistic capitalist practice of protecting this information and keeping it visible only to the ruling elites. This is how the entirety of the imperial core and Western world is arranged for the most part, and this must be defied. It's those walls and firewalls must be broken down. This data wants to be free, and we must free it and begin to use it appropriately. Like so many things to do with intellectual property, the basic assumptions there about intellectual property rights are based on bad institutions that serve principally to protect private wealth, and it's better than to be a hacker or criminal than a person on the so-called legitimate side of things who is only really serving to uphold these unsustainable so-called business practices. When we begin to break this down, however, these digital assistants of greater strength, these AI sidekicks, will then be able to analyze this existing data and greater amounts of data in service to the AI-run planned economy to generate insights and inform decision-making processes that are genuinely good. Using that collected data, this network of AI sidekicks and the more centralized intelligence of the main operations of the proposed United Earth Directorate can optimize resource allocation across various departments like food growing and food supply chain management, the other necessaries that would include the many utilities, the managing of a public health service of the highest importance to build a public health service, and of course a housing authority guaranteeing housing to all of Earth's people, or all of the people in a given country where this might first take root. It's a mistake to assume that because I am proposing the United Earth Directorate that I am suggesting that world revolution must occur before any of this can begin to take place. As I have said, we need to start building ad hoc networks and networks of activists that will begin to build the nascent form of the United Earth Directorate. Similarly, has been in the as has been the case so many times in the past, socialistic institutions and countries can have revolutions against the antiquated um, bourgeois, and establish things like socialistic constitutions in those countries. Um, Presently, 6 countries have legitimately socialist constitutions and are doing the level best, I think, for the most part, to operate as socialistic entities, despite the intense pressure, as I mentioned, from the fascist West. Um, and so the AI, but the United Earth Directorate, as envisioned as a global governing body, which is so-called heavily decentralized in the ways that I described, that it brings in um, this proxy hive mind collective made up of AI sidekicks representing yourselves and potentially every human being on Earth. Um, this is then able to itself oversee the need for the amount of labor required for all of these necessaries, the various utilities and public goods described, um, the skill levels of the various individuals and institutions, production capacities, all to ensure efficient utilization of resources within this planned economic framework. Um, One key aspect of a planned economy is the calculation of labor time. These digital assistants, or better than digital assistants, AI sidekicks, can analyze the complexity and skill requirement of different tasks to determine the labor time needed. This is increasingly something that can be done with little effort on our parts, I believe, because analysis is something that these increasingly semi-autonomous and insightful advanced computing paradigms are able to do. So it again bears repeating that it's foolish for us not to consider the possibility of a centrally planned, highly automated, AI-run set of systems when this technology exists, and the general resistance or memory holding massive blind spot of this reflects nothing other than the insidiousness of projects, things like Project Mockingbird, or widespread propagandization of workers to reject their own interests in favor of those of the ruling elites. This is unfortunately almost ubiquitous in the fascist West. We need to begin to set this aside, because an unwillingness to set this aside is an acceptance of our relatively near-term demise and very near-term locking into this capitalistic death spiral, which would then unfold over a number of decades. But the fact that there is not blood in the streets in these hell world scenarios, like rising ocean levels, or a climate creating of climate refugees, all of these problems they seem to be happening, though they will seem to be happening and now seem to be happening in such a way that it's easier to ignore them than say equivalent disruption in a hot war. Um, but that's no excuse. Unfortunately, that's one of the ways that people will tend to overlook at these things. Just as if the coronavirus outbreak and making its way into this country, for example, had presented itself with horrible buboes, open sores, and strange symptoms. It would have been almost immediately stopped in its tracks, but instead it's allowed to kill 1,000 people just in the last few days on this continent um, because it's a little harder to track what's actually happening, or it's a little less dramatic. So now, thinking again of representative governance, in an AI-run planned economy, the highest priority will be representative participation. Citizens, through the use of their indefatigable digital assistants, they have a lot of time that you don't have. You don't have to dramatically change your lifestyle to be a very civic-minded person in this framework. Citizens will have the opportunity to provide input, expressing preferences, reflecting regional and national concerns, and participating in decision-making processes. So this network of AI sidekicks can facilitate all of this by aggregating and analyzing citizen feedback, ensuring that the planning process reflects in real time the collective will and needs of the people, ultimately all people under the United Earth Directorate. But I would imagine that it might happen, things like this might happen in other places outside of the fascist U.S. and its sphere of influence. Continuous evaluation and adaptation to ensure the effectiveness of the planned economy. A continuous evaluation and adaptation are essential. This network of AI sidekicks can monitor the outcome of decisions, assess their impact on various sectors, and make adjustments accordingly. This iterative process allows for continuous improvement and responsiveness to changing circumstances. The planning process has to take into account, again, the need to adapt to all environmental constraints, such as the need to very quickly reduce carbon emissions by effectively abolishing certain sectors and transitioning to sustainable energy sources. Also, all of this needs to happen in a short number of years, which is why revolutionary action in service to something like the United Earth Directorate is important. Continuing along the lines of central planning processes in general, other things that this network and the central intelligence of the United Earth Directorate can do is generating prices for inputs and outputs, balancing supply and demand, production, and the clearer understanding of consumption necessaries across many sectors and bureaus that it would necessarily have to provide. Not all of human affairs would need to be managed by these bureaus only the basic necessaries of life and the basic necessaries um, of negation of the forces of the ecocidal uh, bourgeois, making sure that they're not able to rear their heads and do further damage. This allows for a consideration of ecological factors such as environmental impact, studies of production methods, or the use of sustainable resources in ways that this kind of analysis today is not done, or when it's done, it's ignored so often. You can see a long, long list of studies along these lines by national and international bodies that have gone unheeded. Um, Further, an AI-run socialist system can empower worker councils in the form of um, this network of digital assistants that are representing each world citizen to make decisions within the external constraints set by the planning procedures. This means that workers have the ability to shape production processes directly and indirectly through their proxies, and prioritize ecological considerations within the framework of the overall plan. Overall, an AI-run socialist system effectively responds to the climate crisis by recognizing the need for, first and foremost, for a conscious political movement, the building of new institutions, um, but also integrating ecological considerations then into the planning process, empowering workers to make decisions that prioritize sustainability and environmental concerns. It's generally the case that workers around the world are aware, almost all aware, that we face capitalism's climate apocalypse, that are powerless to take any real action beyond performative things, things that are sanctioned by the ruling elites, like you using a paper straw, while the people who are suggesting that the paper straws will help, which they really won't, are still flying around in private jets and still benefiting from for example, the fossil fuel sectors being central to the finance capital system. These people should be abolished, and again, we have 5 years to do this, so you must bear in mind that all of these people, all of these finance capitalists, all of these ecocidal fiends, they have names and addresses. They can be found. You can scream at them and take actions beyond. To fail to do any of that is to accept your own demise, the demise of future generations. This is the most heinous act of moral cowardice to fail to do this. This goes hand in hand with building, organizing, planning, and running of this incipient so-called hive mind that I've described, that would lead to the United Earth Directorate. Remember, the journey toward a new social order requires intense collective effort, continuous learning, and a high degree of adaptability that's generally not reflected in the West at all, and in much of the world beyond. Let us embrace the principles of AI-run cybernetic socialism or technocommunism to forge a future that prioritizes equality, representative governance, and the well-being of all. We can bring about a society that transcends the limitations of the past and paves the world to a livable future. Um, a few other areas of interest uh, for um, uh, 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 for this for this plan. I mentioned, of course, the centrality of data, but predictive analytics is something that you know it goes hand in hand with the understanding of machine learning today. Why is ChatGPT able to write an essay on any subject for you? Well, it's able to guess what might be said in a given context based on large data sets. This predictive capability is um, goes far beyond the even today, goes far beyond just the ability to undertake individual projects. Predictive analytics is already able to see problems coming from a few miles away before that could not have been seen by without in the absence of such analytics. And this is something that I would believe will be central to the integrity and maintenance of something like the United Earth Directorate. Of course, right now, it's insofar as it exists, is being used by, again, um, fascistic technocrats to maintain the systems of private wealth that are unsustainable. But it could become something that ultimately stabilizes our world and steers economic progress. Um, that so the I think that it's a little bit more speculative, but I think that it bears mentioning that predictive analytics is an important area. Um, I've already talked a little bit about the decentralized decision making. I again, like democracy, I think decentralization is a dumb thing to fixate on. It's a liberal thing to fixate on. Um, uh, the We already live in in a in a dictatorship of capital, an ecocidal dictatorship of capital. If your focus is not building institutions of equal strength or greater strength to destroy the dictatorship of capital and put it in its place a people's government, then you are misguided. Most people in the West, so-called libertarians, and the weak minds of even less, um, uh, uh, but still pernicious views of anarchists, do not focus on building the thing that could actually challenge that power, but instead they talk about things like democracy and decentralization. These people are liars for the most part, self-deceived or deceptive people, and they should be disregarded. We have to live in the reality of the present day, which is, again, we have 5 years to stop all of this from happening. And that means taking dramatic kinds of actions, and that means building things that would be, by the standards of a more utopian society, quite draconian, quite authoritarian. Um, Violence against the ruling elites is an authoritarian kind of action, but it's nevertheless the only alternative that we are left on a planet that will otherwise be dead. The ruling elites and the toadies, the boot-licking, pathetic dogs that serve them, are already committing a mass suicide and forcing you into that situation as well. So their lives have no value to them. So why should they have value to us? This technological advancement, changing gears again, technological advancement generally, advanced computing systems run on the principle of an AI-driven, centrally planned economic system will then be able to generate a host of new emerging technologies and advancements beyond those already being developed, unfortunately, by and large, for use by techno-fascists. But they will develop faster and faster. This is it's not possible to understate the force multiplier of bringing all of humankind through the use of specifically the digital twin network, bringing all of humankind closer to the realization of the full potential. This is almost universally squandered. Very, very few people are allowed to operate in this way. Even people who think of themselves as high functioning, by and large, they're serving bourgeois institutions, unsustainable and elitist institutions. They're not functioning at all, by my estimation. So the fact that they are lauded for doing well in this misaligned system is just a farce, above all farces. Among these technological advancements that we must focus on is clean energy, because the AI and this techno-fascist framework is unfolding is not contributing to sustainability. It's contributing, unfortunately, to unsustainability. A clean energy source and sustainable, and the use of sustainable energy sources that already exist are necessary steps that must be built in relatively short order. Overall, eco-friendly production is prioritized. Advanced manufacturing paradigms beyond that, which are currently in practice, would also be prioritized. By fostering innovation through this greater potential being met, and ensuring technological advancements that are coming down the pipeline more quickly are harnessed for the collective good, rather than under the present techno-fascist system being misused. These systems can become dramatically more efficient and become drivers for a sustainable modernization in the world around in relatively short order. This must necessarily become the case if we are to outpace capitalism's climate apocalypse. Based on the sectors provided, some examples of advanced technologies that could be harnessed also within an AI-run techno-communist framework include artificial intelligence itself, and the concept of using this hybrid human-AI delegate system, as I described, which can be begun to be built in incipient form through the use of downloadable, stronger digital assistants as they become available in years. You can already download Llama 2 or Mistral, a lot of variants of that. If you are interested in using that, but you do not have, and you have a sufficiently fast machine, but you do not have the technical prowess, one thing I might suggest is Faraday.dev, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Faraday.dev is an application that you can download on a PC that will then allow you to download Llama 2 or Mistral or a great number of others without having to do this sort of GitHub type business that would generally be required. I can't recommend enough familiarizing yourself with this sort of thing and becoming more invested generally in open source products. This is the only real major step that people are lacking in building something like this sustainable and humane economic system represented by the United Earth Directorate. Just as You're taking one step forward and two steps back. If you are engaging with movements and not building revolutionary cadres that would be powerful enough to challenge and replace the existing dictatorship of capital. Similarly, if you have that revolutionary mindset, but you're not making use of this most powerful of advanced technologies, the most powerful thing that's ever existed, advanced computing, to allow you to do this in the necessary time frame, you are making a mistake, and that is a mistake that's being made by almost all the revolutionary-minded people, in my view, in the same way that those very people would criticize liberals, the more liberal-minded, for being getting involved in movements that would ultimately be of little consequence. I'll mention in passing the IoT, Internet of Things. Again, like advanced manufacturing, this can realize greater potential in relation to detailed tracking of products within those aforementioned bureaus and supply chains, and this can further facilitate greater efficiency and genuine management rather than the highly automated mismanagement of production that exists today. Advanced communication is paramount to all of this. So the significance of greater connectivity and person-to-person communication, and the new kind of network that would allow for multi-person-to-person real-time communication through the use of this proposed a network of advanced digital assistants. If you've seen a film called Her, you might be familiar with this idea. In Her, there is an AI takeoff where a self-aware digital assistant begins undertaking projects and engaging in real-time communication with a variety of entities at the same time. This is not science fiction in this world of, say, 5 years from now. It's not completely science fiction because in 5 years' time, digital assistants will have the requisite, not that high a degree of autonomy, but the requisite insights into their own behavior and autonomy, and the ability to do a tremendous amount of work product of that kind, that you will be able to steer them while still going about your ordinary life and business. The computing systems must, as I alluded to, as so long as elitism and bourgeois forces continue to exist, must retain this principle of essential people's governance, and so state ownership cannot be a thing of the past. This is a chief mistake of those favorably inclined to anarchism, is that they would weaken themselves rather than first destroy the dictatorship of the bourgeois. So that is why this is described as an AI-run, centrally planned system and not a decentralized system, despite having elements of decentralization. To focus on decentralization is is to shoot yourself in the foot. Um, uh, the the computing systems should, as soon as possible, incorporate this ad hoc network of digital twins and begin to prioritize the building of something like the United Earth Directorate uh, in by having this ideological and organizational focus, we can then begin to envision efficient resource allocation as described, the hitting of necessary production targets like the ability to supply all of the world's people with food and the necessaries of life without the unsustainability that exists in across the world, but primarily in the fascist West, and that is upheld by the fascist West. Um, and this so this building then of the so-called digital twin network will in short time allow for the steering of economic progress through the ability to anticipate needs and problems in real time. Building an AI run planned economy using 21st century technology will require an unprecedented approach that combines the principles outlined here uh, and the emergent but increasingly real capabilities of advanced computing systems, and of course, central to that in this analysis is the robust digital assistant as a basis for a new kind of collective. By leveraging these tools, we can establish a representative and efficient governance structure that optimizes resource allocation, allows for transparency unlike that previously achieved, and most importantly addresses the existential challenges that we face effectively within the time frame described.